Hi, it's Maija here, and I thought I'd just make a casual sort of anticipated 2020 releases video. I made some coffee and I'm just gonna go through my Goodreads want to read list, sorted by date, and see what 2020 releases I've already added there, because I've added stuff there throughout the year when things have been announced. So I don't even remember all that I have there, but we're gonna go through it. First, I have to acknowledge that I got the idea to do this sort of casual sit-down release video based on Books and Lala's upcoming books that sound cool. In the latest one, at least, she's just hanging out and seeing what's on her Goodreads. So I'm going to use my tablet for this, so that's what I'm looking at when I'm looking down. And if there's a cover already, I'm going to show that to you. While I'm searching, I'm going to say already that Piranesi by Susanna Clarke is going to be on that list. You might know that Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is one of my favorite books like ever. And she's coming out with a new book in 2020. So that's gonna be on this list. I'm gonna go to all books because I have 2 TBR shelves. I have a want to read shelf and maybe TBR shelf. So those are the ones that I'm not super excited for, but they're on my radar. I know about them. They might be cool. So let's sort this by date published. Okay, so the very first book that I have on this list coming out in 2020 is Piranesi. And that one has a really, really cool description. It says, Piranesi has always lived in the house, capital H. It has hundreds, if not thousands, of rooms and corridors imprisoning an ocean, a watery labyrinth. Once in a while he sees his friend, the other, who needs Piranesi for his scientific research into a great and secret knowledge. Piranesi records his findings in his journal. Then messages begin to appear. All is not what it seems. A terrible truth unravels as evidence emerges of another person and perhaps even another world outside the house's walls. It's an adult fantasy, and this idea of this vast house with hundreds of rooms seems like something that Susanna Clarke would be great to write about. It sounds like it will be super atmospheric. So the second book here is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. Moreno-Garcia writes standalones and a wide variety of different genres or topics. And this one is a Gothic suspense novel. A story about an isolated mansion in 1950s Mexico and the brave socialite drawn to its treacherous secrets. After receiving a frantic letter from her newlywed cousin begging for someone to save her from a mysterious doom, Noemi Taboada heads to High Place, a distant house in the Mexican countryside. She's not sure what she will find. Her cousin's husband, a handsome Englishman, is a stranger and Noemi knows little about the region. So the main character is a glamorous debutante. The house begins to invade her dreams with visions of blood and doom. Yeah, it's no wonder I've added this. I own a bunch of Silvia Moreno-Garcia stuff, but I haven't read them, but they all sound so good, and this is no exception. And the next one on my list is Zentjo's The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water, which I believe was a novella. Yeah, it's a Tour.com novella coming out next year. And Zentjo was tweeting about it, comparing it to Base and Chirrut fanfic from Rogue One. It says that it's a found family wuxia fantasy that combines the vibrancy of old-school martial arts movies with characters drawn from the margins of history. A bandit walks into a coffee house and it all goes downhill from there. Guet Im, a young votary of the Order of the Pure Moon, joins up with an eclectic group of thieves, whether they like it or not, in order to protect a sacred object, and finds herself in a far more complicated situation than she could have ever imagined. And this one already has a cover, which I'm finding very difficult to show you on the screen. You can't really see, but it has 2 figures here. One of them with a flower and one of them with a sword. I found a tweet that I was talking about. Zentjo said that when Barnes & Noble Sci-fi asked about what inspired the novella, I started listing very respectable sources of inspiration, but then I was like, come on Zen, just admit it's a Base and Chirrut fanfic. And then moving on, there's something called Forest of Souls by Laurie M. Lee. This is on my maybe TBR, so I'm guessing it's young adult fantasy, because usually it takes me a while to add them to my real TBR. I wait until it's out and until I hear that people whose opinions are similar to mine also like the book. And then I'm gonna add it to my TBR. Yes, it is young adult fantasy like I suspected. An epic unrelenting tale of destiny and sisterhood. Saoirse Ashwin comes from nothing, but she's intent on becoming something. After years of training to become the Queen's next royal spy, her plans are derailed when shamans attack and kill her best friend Saengo. And then Saoirse somehow restores Saengo to life. Necromancy. That's the reason why I've added this. Unveiled as the first light wender in living memory, Saoirse is summoned to the domain of the Spider King. For centuries he has used his influence over the dead wood, an ancient forest possessed by souls, to enforce peace between the kingdoms. Now with the trees growing wild and untamed, only a light wender can restrain them. And the cover is really beautiful. Might be by Charlie Bowater, but I have to check. But this is what it looks like. I'm gonna Google who has done this cover. Yeah, I was right. So we're moving on. Next I have the Tyrant Baru Cormorant by Seth Dickinson, which is the third book in the Baru Cormorant series, The Trade of Baru Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. I'm not actually sure what the name of this series is. Masquerade or something? Yeah, The Masquerade. But I've only read the first book, which I loved, and I have the Monster Baru Cormorant. I've had it since it came out about a year ago now. I haven't read it. I'm sort of waiting for the third book now to read it. It comes out in June 2020, so I think I'm gonna time my reading so that I reread this and then read the second and then be ready for the third by the time it comes out. So in the first half of the year I'm gonna reread this. But I'm not gonna read the description, but this one was a revenge story and it's a fantasy with no magic, but a lot of plotting. Okay, and next we have Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon. So I think I remember that this is a fantasy book that Yoon is coming out with. The new blockbuster original fantasy. Yeah, I really liked the Machineries of Empire series. Nine Fox Gambit was the first book. And I didn't enjoy Lee's middle grade book, The Dragon Pearl. But this one is an adult book again, so I think I'm gonna like it. For generations, the Empire has spread across the world, nigh unstoppable in their advance. Its power depends on its automata, magically animated and programmed with sigils and patterns painted in mystical pigments. A symbol painter, themselves a colonial subject, is frustrated in their work when their supply of Phoenix Extravagant dries up and sets out to find the source. What they'll discover is darker than anything they could have imagined. So I like it, a painter as a main character. Then next I have the Murderbot novel here. Martha Wells's Network Effect comes out in May. And this one has a cover already. Let's see if I can show it. So if you have read the Murderbot novellas from Tor.com, this is now a full-on novel with the same main character. I think you should read the novellas first if you haven't read them. The cover art is really on the line with the novellas. I'm not going to read a lot about this. It just says that I'm usually alone in my head, and that's where 90+% of my problems are. So Murderbot is a great character. It's this AI who has gained self-awareness, a robot, and who thinks that its attachment to the humans around it is merely professional obligation. But it never is. And on March, The City We Became, which is N.K. Jemisin's new book, and that is an urban fantasy or like contemporary fantasy set in modern day, that comes out. It's based on the short story. It's collected in the How Long Till Black Future Month collection, about like cities gaining awareness and coming to life, and the cities have protectors, human protectors. It's a full novel in that world. It wasn't my favorite of the short fiction in this, so just to see what I think of the novel. It's set in New York. Okay. Then there's When We Were Magic by Sarah Gailey. Sarah Gailey is someone who I've been sort of seeing around, did the American Hippo series, and it's a sly, witchy, dark comedy about 4 teens whose magic goes wildly awry. Keeping a magic secret is hard. Being in love with your best friend is harder. Alexis has always been able to rely on 2 things, her best friends and the magic powers they all share. I think this is a contemporary fantasy too. Their secret is what brought them together, and their love for each other is unshakable, even when that love is complicated. When accidental magic goes sideways and a boy winds up dead, Alexis and her friends come together to try to right a terrible wrong. It has a cover which I am not a huge fan of, moving on, there is the new Rivers of London, or Peter Grant book from Ben Aaronovitch, False Value. It comes out in February. That is an urban fantasy series. The main character is a police officer who's also a wizard. I'm not going to go into that since that's like the 8th book in the series. Then Sean McGuire's Come Tumbling Down, which is the 5th Wayward Children book, comes out. And I really like the Wayward Children, especially because there's illustrations by Rowena Kai in them, and I just love Kai's art. So this is focused again on Jack, who was the main character in the second novella and was also there in the first novella, a big character in that. They're sort of a scientist character. And then the final 2020 release that I have here, that I don't think we know a lot about yet, that is Elatsoe by Darcie Little Badger. I have read one short story from Darcie Little Badger. It was in People of Color Destroy Fantasy special issue of Fancy magazine, and the story was called Black the Regalia, and I really liked it. And a big plus that was in when I saw the announcement just a couple of weeks ago, when it was announced that it's gonna be illustrated by Rowena Kai. So it's gonna be a gorgeous book. I have no idea what it's actually about, but there is a small blurb here. Elatsoe is a ghostly YA set in a contemporary America shaped by the ancestral magics and knowledge of its indigenous and immigrant peoples. When Elatsoe's beloved older cousin dies under mysterious circumstances, Elatsoe must track down his murderer in a town none too willing to give up its dark secrets. So I'm just in general really excited to see how the illustrations and the text go together, whether it's just like small spot illustrations or whether it's done with the illustrations tied more in with the text, like with bigger spreads and things like that. So that was 12 books that I'm looking forward to in the next year. I thought I was missing one. I thought I had been looking at a new release that wasn't on this list. For some reason, Goodreads just didn't organize it properly. But there's one more that sounds very interesting that comes out in 2020 from Orbit, and that is Rook and Rose by M.A. Carrick. And that's a pen name for a writer duo, and one half of that is Mary Brennan, who wrote the Lady Trent series, and the other half is Alec Helms, who I don't know from before. But this is a fantasy novel. A clever but desperate con artist attempts to pull off the scheme of her lifetime, infiltrating a noble house by posing as a long-estranged family member, and finds herself drawn into an ever-deepening web of magical and political intrigue with dangerous consequences in a 3-book deal, so I think it's going to be a trilogy. But I love like court intrigue books with a newcomer or outsider coming to court. So I am super excited about that. I've read the first Lady Trent book from Mary Brennan, and I like that, so I'm looking forward to seeing what this will be like. Let me know what you are looking forward to from the releases that you know that are coming out next year. My most anticipated book, of course, is Piranesi. I think that's a lot of people's most anticipated. It's been a decade or something since Jonathan Strange, and I'm so excited. I'm gonna throw a party when it comes out. But that's all from me for now. Let's talk more in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video.